A wheat farm outside Ransom, Kansas, had a 36-foot ocean lifeboat parked behind the machine shed, 800 miles from the nearest saltwater, with a short bronze tube lying in the cheatgrass underneath it. Nobody could tell you how long the tube had been on the ground. The boat itself had been there since 1968. It sat up on 2 rows of railroad ties with its bow pointed at the grain leg, double-ended. Fat in the middle, painted a chalky white that had gone the color of an old bone, and it was so far out of place that people who drove that road every day of their lives had stopped seeing it. In the 1980s, when bin space got tight, somebody had filled it with wheat through a hatch cut in the deck. After that, it held hay. After that, it held nothing at all, and the cheatgrass came up around the ties, and the mice moved in, and the paint chalked off in sheets, and for 57 years, the only water that boat ever touched was rain. The estate sale was on a Saturday in May 2025. It was a good sale, the kind that draws 300 people, because the family was selling the ground and everything that had ever been set down on it, 2 combines, a rod weeder, 40 years of scrap iron in rows, a shop full of tooling, and at the very back, past the last row of iron, Lot 209. The catalog described Lot 209 in 7 words. Wood boat, 36 feet, sold where is. The auctioneer walked the crowd out to it because he had to. He climbed up on a hay trailer beside it, and before he asked for $1, he said the thing everybody was already thinking, which was that the nearest water deep enough to float it was 800 miles away and downhill the whole distance. That got a laugh. Then a man in the front pointed under the bilge with his sale card and said there was a hole in the bottom of it. Then he counted out loud so the whole crowd could hear him do it, and said there were 5 holes in the bottom of it. That got a bigger laugh, and it kept going, because once a crowd decides a thing is funny, the bidding is over before it starts. Somebody at the back said you could not give it away. Somebody else looked in through the hatch and announced that the previous owner had poured a concrete floor in it, which everybody agreed was exactly the kind of thing a man does when he has given up on something. And a fellow in a seed cap said the only honest way to price it was by the cord, and got the last laugh of the day out of it. The auctioneer asked for $200 and got nothing. He asked for $100 and got nothing. He said he would take any bid at all, from anybody, and a hand went up at the back for $50, and another one beat it at $85, and that was the end of it. Lot 209, a 36-foot boat, 9 tons of it, sold for $85 to a welder from 2 counties over. A man walked up afterward and offered him $50 for it as firewood and said he was doing him a favor, and several people standing there agreed out loud that he was. The welder's name was Ray Halstead. He was 62. He had a shop outside Bazine where he built, moved, and set grain bins, which sounds like a small business and is not, because a bin has to come down on its foundation dead level and dead even, and Ray had spent 30 years learning that the only way to know what a thing weighs is to pick it up and read it. He owned 4 hydraulic jacks with load cells in the heads. He could tell you what any object in a farmyard weighed, corner by corner, within about 20 pounds. And he had never once in his life been able to walk past something heavy without wondering. He did not know boats. He had never owned one. He bid $85 because the crowd was laughing, and because he had gone and put his hand on the hull while the auctioneer was still talking, and the planking under his palm was not soft. It was 57 years in a field, and it was hard as a bench top. That was the whole reason. Everything that follows came out of one man touching a boat and being surprised. If you've made it this far into Ray's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. Moving it was the first education. He came back on the Tuesday with a lowboy and a crane truck, expecting to sling it and be gone by noon. And the first sling he put under it, he backed straight off, because the boat did not lift like a wooden boat. So he did what he does. He set his 4 jacks under the ties, put a 5th point under the forefoot and a 6th under the stern knee, and he picked that boat up 1.5 inches off the ground and read the sails. 18,000 pounds. Tons, with no engine in it because the engine was long gone, and with a stern that came off the ground almost willingly. Nearly 2/3 of the whole weight was sitting between the 2 middle jacks, in a section of the boat about 14 feet long. He wrote the 6 numbers on the back of a feed ticket and stood there looking at them, because a wooden hull that size, empty, has no business weighing 18,000 pounds, and it certainly has no business carrying it all in the middle. The men who came to help him load had opinions about that. The general opinion was that the boat was waterlogged and rotten, and that most of the 18,000 pounds was water in the wood, which is a sensible thing to think, and would have been true of almost any other wooden boat that had sat outdoors for 57 years. Ray put a moisture meter on the planking in 9 places on the way home and got readings between 9 and 12%, which is drier than the studs in most houses. Western Kansas had been curing that boat like a barn. He found out why once he got it home and got the hatch off. The hatch was a rough rectangle somebody had cut in the deck with a handsaw, screwed back down with a lid made out of a road sign turned face in. Under it was 57 years of wheat chaff and mouse bedding packed solid to the frames. It took him and a shop vacuum 3 evenings. What came up out from under the chaff was concrete. Gray concrete in the bottom of the boat poured between the frames in 11 separate slabs, each one running the width of the hull and stopping short of the planking on both sides by about 1 inch. Everybody who came by the shop that month said the same thing about it. Somebody poured a floor in your boat, Ray. Somebody filled it with concrete so it wouldn't blow away. He counted other things while he was in there. He counted the tubes. There were bronze tubes going down through the deck and out through the bottom of the hull, open at both ends, and there were 6 of them, 5 still in place and 1 lying in the grass 90 miles away under where the boat used to sit, which he drove back and got. He counted fastenings for a whole Sunday and quit at 4,200 and never found a single iron one below the waterline. Not one. Every screw, every rivet, every through bolt under that waterline was bronze, and bronze in 1937 was not cheap. By the middle of June, he had 5 lines written in marker on the shop wall because he had stopped being able to keep them in his head. 1. 6 bronze tubes through the bottom, 5 in place, 1 on the ground. 2. 11 slabs of concrete between the frames and not one of them touching the planking. 3. 18,000 pounds with the engine gone and 2/3 of it in the middle 14 feet. 4. 4,200 bronze fastenings and no iron at all under the waterline. 5. A deck that sits 22 inches above where the water would come to and slopes down and aft and drains into those tubes. Here is what I want you to hold on to, because the rest of this story is 3 questions and the boat answers them in 3 different places. The first question is whether the deck Ray was standing on was the deck that was built into her or a deck somebody put in later. The second question is where 3,040 pounds of what everybody called junk concrete actually came from. And the third question is whether a boat that had not touched water since 1968 could still stand itself back up. Ray got the answer to none of them in Kansas. He got them because he made a phone call in September 2025 to a maritime training school on the Oregon coast and read them the 5 lines off his wall, and the woman who took the call put him on hold for 11 minutes. What she came back with was this. The boat in his yard was a self-righting, self-bailing motor lifeboat built in 1937 at a government boat shop, one of a class that stood on stations on both coasts and the Great Lakes for 50 years. His hull had served at a station on Lake Michigan from 1937 until she was condemned and surplused in 1968. A man named Emmett Voss bought her at a government sale in Chicago that autumn for $310, trucked her to his brother-in-law's wheat ground in Kansas, meaning to make a river cruiser out of her, pulled the engine, cut the hatch, and then, as far as anybody can tell, simply never came back to it. He died in 1994. The boat outlived his intentions by 57 years. And then she told him why they cared, and it had nothing to do with history. A county water rescue program on that coast trains volunteer crews to work a river bar. Their whole fleet is modern aluminum, and every one of those boats is self-righting, and not one of them may be rolled on purpose, because the manufacturers do not permit it, and the insurers will not carry it. So the crews learn capsize recovery in a pool and in a simulator, which teaches you the drill and teaches you nothing whatsoever about what 9 tons of boat does under you when it goes over. There are 3 wooden boats of this class left on that coast. All 3 are museum boats with accession numbers and boards of directors, and none of them will ever be rolled again. Ray's boat had no accession number, no board, and no museum. It had a wheat hatch and a road sign for a lid. That is the whole economics of it, and it is worth saying plainly, because this channel usually ends with somebody proving an old machine is better than a new one, and this is not that story. A modern aluminum rescue boat is faster, safer, warmer, and better in every measurable way than a wooden boat from 1937. Nobody on that coast wanted this hull because it was superior. They wanted it because it was expendable in exactly the way that matters. It belonged to a man in Kansas who did not care what it was worth on a wall, and it could therefore be thrown on its back, on purpose, with people inside it, over and over, for as long as the wood holds. Its value was that you were allowed to break it. 3 parties made him one offer together in October 2025, a county rescue program, a state maritime training school, and a working waterfront group. $92,000 for the boat delivered to Oregon, and one written condition, which was the whole of it: the money moved only after she was launched, run under her own power, and rolled past 90 degrees with crew aboard and came back up on her own. If she stayed over, they owed him nothing. Their surveyor came out in October and spent 2 days under her, and he was not unkind about it, but he wrote what he saw. The deck had a sawn hatch in it. There was a fur patch in the port sheer strake where the class specified cedar. The stem had a scarf joint in it. And on the strength of the hatch and the patch he wrote the sentence that nearly ended it: deck probably not original, hull extensively altered. Which mattered enormously, because on a self-bailing boat, the deck is not a floor. The deck is the lid of the buoyancy. If somebody had put a new deck in her at a different height, she would not come back up, and no amount of history would change that. Ray argued with nobody. He went and got a tape and a set of calipers, and he pulled all 6 tubes. They were all the same casting, same wall, same 4-inch bore, same little raised coat on the flange. But they were 6 different lengths, and the lengths were not random. 2 of them were 13 5/8 inches. 2 of them were 15 3/8 inches. 2 of them were 14 1/2. The short pair came out of the bow, the long pair came out of the middle pair came out aft, and when he laid them out on the bench and measured them against each other, port matched starboard on every pair within 1/16 of an inch. He drove out to the school surveyor with all 6 of them in a milk crate, laid them on the tailgate in order, and made the man measure them himself. That is not a thing you can fake, and it is not a thing you can get by accident. A deck has camber, it crowns up in the middle, and it has shear, it sweeps up at the ends. The distance from a sloping camber deck down to a curved hull bottom is different at every station along the boat, so a shop cutting drain tubes cuts each one in place against that deck. And every tube comes out a different length in a smooth graded set that mirrors itself side to side. A converter putting in a new deck at a new height would have produced 6 tubes of one length, or 6 of no length in particular. 6 graded lengths, symmetric within 1/16, meant those tubes were cut against that deck by the people who built her. And the 6th tube, the one that had been lying in the cheatgrass under the bow since before anybody could remember, measured 14 1/2 inches and matched its opposite number to a 32nd. First question answered. It was her deck. They set the trial for a Saturday in November 2025 at a flooded sand pit outside Great Bend. Because Ray would not put that boat on a truck to Oregon without knowing. He hired a 40-ton crane. He put a rebuilt 6-cylinder marine diesel in her that went her weight for weight against the original. He borrowed a barge winch and rigged a line to a strong point at her masthead so they could pull her over in flat water with a diver in and a rescue boat alongside. About 40 people came out to watch. 2 of them were men who had laughed at the sail in May. She went in and floated on her marks, which was the first good moment. She ran. And then the winch took a strain, and she leaned and went past 90 and hung there. She hung at about 100 degrees, mast in the water rolled up on her side like a hog in a wallow, and she did not come back. They took the strain off, and she still did not come back. Somebody counted 20 seconds out loud and then stopped counting, because it had become obvious that counting was not going to help. Then she settled another 2 or 3 degrees, which is the worst direction a boat can move at that moment, and the diver came up and got clear, and the crane operator started swinging his boom over without being asked. They ended up bringing her upright with the crane and a loader on the bank, and the sound of that boat being dragged back onto her bottom in front of 40 people is the sound Ray describes when anybody asks him what the worst part was. Nobody laughed at the pit. That is the thing he mentions. The 2 men who had laughed in May stood on the bank with everybody else and said nothing at all, which was somehow worse than the laughing, and one of them helped rig the loader line. The Oregon deal did not die that afternoon, but it went quiet, which is worse. A salvage man from Wichita called him on the Monday and offered $2,600 for the bronze in her, the 4,200 fastenings, the 6 tubes, and the rudder hardware, and pointed out reasonably that this was 30 times what he paid. In December, a restaurant group out of Denver offered him $140,000 if he would let them cut her in half down the middle and stand the 2 halves either side of a doorway. He turned down both, and he was not being noble. He was being stubborn, and he was being stubborn because he had a bench with 6 bronze tubes on it that told him the boat was right, even when the boat had just proved she wasn't. It took him until January to find the 3 reasons, and all 3 of them were things men had done to her. The first one was his. In June, to settle the argument about the concrete, he had taken a hammer and a chisel and broken out one of the 11 slabs, number 7, the one just aft of midships. Under the gray skin, it was not concrete at all in any ordinary sense. It was iron. It was punchings, the little round slugs of press, knocks out of steel plate, thousands of them, packed and grouted in place. He had weighed the pieces he broke out, because that is what Ray does with everything. 268 pounds. And then he had swept the bay clean and left it empty, and gone off pleased with himself, having removed 268 pounds from the lowest point in a boat whose entire ability to stand up comes from weight being low. The second was Emmett Voss's. The hatch he sawed in 1968 was screwed down, but had never been gasketed, and a forward air case, which is a sealed compartment whose only job is to be full of nothing, had been quietly taking water through those screw holes from the moment she floated. The third belonged to 57 years in a wheat field. 2 of the 6 tubes were packed solid with chaff and dried mud. So when she heeled and the deck took water, that water could not get out, and 900 pounds of it stayed up on deck, high, on the wrong side, holding her down. Ray repoured slab 7 that winter with iron punchings and grout to 268 pounds on the load cells, and while he had the boat gutted, he weighed every one of the other 10 as he checked them and wrote the total on the wall under his 5 lines. 3,040 pounds. Second question answered. It was never junk concrete, and it was never somebody's idea. It was her ballast, poured into her at the shop in 1937 to a schedule low and central in 11 bays, deliberately stopping an inch short of the planking on both sides so that water could always run past it and out. Every single man who had walked into that shop and laughed at the concrete in the bottom of the boat had been laughing at the reason the boat can come back up. He gasketed the hatch. He rotted and reamed all 6 tubes. And in March 2026, a 36-foot boat built in 1937 went 1,680 miles on a lowboy from Ransom, Kansas to Garibaldi, Oregon over 3 mountain passes with a pilot car, and Ray Halstead followed it the whole way in a pickup and slept in it twice. They launched her in April 2026 on a rising tide. She ran. That was the first thing, and for a boat that had been dry since 1968, it was not nothing. Then they took her out into the bay to the barge, and the crowd on the jetty and along the south breakwater was somewhere around 600 people, which is a lot in a town that size, and 2 of them had flown out from Kansas at their own expense. 2 crew went aboard in harnesses and helmets. The hatches were dogged. A diver was in the water, and a rescue boat lay 30 feet off. The barge winch took the masthead line and pulled. She went over slowly, the way a heavy thing goes over. She passed 90 with her deck in the water and kept going to 118 degrees, all the way past upside down and onto her back, and the line went slack, and for about a second and a half nothing happened at all. It is a strange thing to watch 600 people go quiet at once. The 2 who had flown out from Kansas were standing near the end of the breakwater, and one of them said afterward that in that second and a half he was certain, absolutely certain, that they had all come a very long way to watch a man lose $85 twice. Then 3,040 pounds of iron in 11 bays did the only thing it has ever done, and she came up. 8 seconds. Mast out of the water, crew still in her, deck awash and running. The water on that deck went out through 6 bronze tubes in 22 seconds while everybody stood on the breakwater and watched it go, and one of those 6 tubes had spent decades lying in the cheatgrass in a Kansas wheat field, where a man with a sail card counted the holes in the bottom of the boat out loud and got a laugh out of it. Third question answered. The $92,000 was wired that afternoon. She is on the training roster for 40 days a year, and the county, the school, and the waterfront group split her 3 ways by season. She gets rolled on purpose with people aboard several times every year, which is the one thing all 3 of the museum boats on that coast will never do again. And here is the part Ray likes best, and he did not know it until somebody at the school looked up her record. She spent 31 years on Lake Michigan and was condemned in 1968 without ever having crossed a river bar, because there are no bars on Lake Michigan. She was built in 1937 to do a thing she never once did. She crossed the Tillamook Bar for the first time in her life in April 2026. Under her own power, at 89 years old, having spent 57 of those years full of wheat 800 miles from the sea, bought for $85 by a man who noticed that the wood was hard.